Hello from Detroit.
Hi, I'm Eric.
I'm Brad. You know what? This is great. This is the first time we've done Thinking Out Loud together.
Cheers.
Salud, my friend. And what a better way to kick off working together on Thinking Out Loud than talking about risk.
Especially having me on camera.
Let's talk about risk, baby. But it's a really big deal. I think it's super important when it comes to influencer marketing because you're the CMO, you're the brand manager. You hear a lot of things out there about influencer that makes you scratch your head. Like, ooh, Logan Paul, not something we want our brand to be associated with these days. PewDiePie, racism, no thank you. Sam and Nia, fake pregnancy.
We don't even say those names.
Right, we didn't say those names, in fact. So
they're recovering their brand a little bit.
They have recovered, kudos to them. But what can you do, Mr. or Mrs. Brand Manager, to make sure you're protecting your brand as part of an influencer campaign?
Well, hold on.
Yes.
Before we get to what I can do,
Pump the brakes.
tell me, what are the risks, Brad?
Well, you know, Eric, there are a few risks. The first one that you should be aware of, I think this is an important thing. So for brand managers, CMOs, you're used to running campaigns. You run a tight ship. You know that you're successful because your media drops when you say it's going to drop. And that's fantastic. It's a little trickier when it comes to influencers. The reality is that timelines can slip on influencer campaigns. So if you have a timeline that is really particular for a campaign, influencer is going to be a tricky component to do. It can be done, it can be managed. We'll talk about that in a minute, but that does bring some risk into that campaign.
Sure, some brands are going to be more regimented for what month a spend can go in, for example.
Right.
And just one slippage of a day can cause havoc because you just don't have the control, like you said.
Absolutely. The influencer gets sick, their grandma dies, they're out for a funeral, whatever it is. And sometimes it's the brand's fault. Like, oh, hey, we had to push this back 2 days. Well, guess what? By you pushing it back 2 days, the influencer's now out of the country for the next 2 weeks. So that 2 days causes really a 16-day delay. So that can be problematic.
And yeah, and that's funny that you bring that example up.
It is a little bit funny. We may or may not have had an experience recently where an influencer was on vacation in, say, Mexico.
When the green light finally came up, but with some requested tweaks.
Yes.
But that influencer just happened to be on vacation and they weren't really interested.
Yeah. What's a little bit of extra cash versus me being able to relax, despite me having committed to it? So
Poolside with a margarita, or make some tweaks so you don't actually say something wrong about a brand.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's clear, right? Mm-hmm. So the timeline is for sure one risk. What else you got? Other risks that you can think of?
Well, there's the fact that in traditional media, if you don't like something, you control it. You own it.
Yep.
You don't own this media. This is content that these creators are making, and you don't. If let's say you don't like it for some reason, somehow it got out there, or it went sideways somehow, you don't have the right to ask them. You can't take it down. You don't have takedown rights like you would in traditional media.
That's right. So if you put up a billboard that has your brand, right, Acme Co., and then a month later there's something on that billboard that you're really uncomfortable with, you can take that billboard down. You have the rights. Now with influencer, I want to add one little nuance to what you said, is that you will get a chance to preview the post or the video, right? That's a very common practice in influencer. But times change, branding changes based on everything that's happening in the world around us. And if you're not doing a dedicated video, and even a lot of cases if you're doing a dedicated video, you do not have the rights to pull down the content because it's living on the influencer's channel, and that is their property. Those are their rights that you are paying to be inserted in, but you can't fundamentally tear down content after the fact.
And yes, you do have, you often, like in almost every campaign that we do, we procure previews that not only we look at as kind of a first go over, just to make sure that we're passing something that we're proud of onto the client, but you then would be able to look at it yourself. But let's say something is going wrong. Like there's the example of the Kanoa earbuds. This was a Kickstarter campaign where Brody, I forgot.
Links in the description. You can check out the video.
Forgot his name. He was engaged by this company to do a tech review of these Bluetooth headphones, and just had a horrible experience. And the way that company handled it, where they tried to just clamp down, and then they tried to buy his silence, or more of a no-no. They tried to buy a positive review despite his experience.
Right.
He flipped it, and it's his content.
Absolutely.
He said, I'm not going forward with your contract. I'm not going forward with this deal. I'm going to speak about my experience with this product. And
single-handedly sunk the company by most people's estimation. So I think that's an important thing is that, look, when you're working with influencers, you want them to be speaking in their own language. You don't want to try to force them to say things that they don't believe. And if you do, it's either going to come across inauthentic and not be as effective as you want, or you can push an influencer to a point where it's going to completely change things 180 degrees. Now, influencer marketing as a whole is going to be positive if the influencer already likes your product. So we would never advocate for an influencer to try to push or hawk a product that they didn't like. But even within the realm of being generally supportive of a brand, you've got to be really careful to not try to force the influencer to use certain buzzwords or a certain way that you as the brand speak. So we talk about that a lot.
The more work you do up front, working with an agency ideally, but even if you've taken this in-house and you're doing it, and the more work you do vetting and getting to know the host and make sure that they're a right fit up front gives you that much more freedom on the back. But working with an agency like ourselves, you have, well, I guess we're moving into the realm not of the risk, but now what can you do about it to mitigate these risks? Yeah,
for sure. So the risks we covered so far have been, look, timelines can slip. That can be certainly something that's challenging. You don't have takedown rights necessarily on all media that you're putting out there with influencers. You can get a disgruntled host if you don't treat them the right way and engage with them properly. And this is kind of related to the first point.
We've talked about another one.
There's going to be more turnover, which basically means, look, yes, there's the timeline slip where someone was committed to doing it in the 30th of 1 month and now it's getting pushed back 2 or 3 weeks. But also, influencers may decide that doing brand deals is no longer a good fit for their channel, or that they've oversaturated their channel, so they may just decide to pull out entirely. So there can be a lot more turnover to a campaign, which I think dovetails nicely into saying, well, how can we mitigate that risk? So one of the things I'll cover maybe is the turnover in the timelines, and then you can talk a little bit about maybe holistically what you can do. But with turnover in timelines, I think it's just knowing, hey, you're going to have turnover. So if a brand is running an influencer campaign, particularly if it's the first time you've done it, I would allocate about 20% more budget than you think you will need to influencers up front. And here's what I mean by that. Is if you were spending $120,000 with influencers in your budget, there's a very good chance that something's going to happen to $20,000 of that budget at the last minute because of something that came up with an influencer. So if you want $100,000 in spend, you're likely better served to start out a little bit higher and saying, oh, I'm going to go with $120,000 in spend to actually get at that $100,000 in spend. And then similarly with the timelines, I think it's just really important to know timelines are likely to slip with influencers if you're not experienced in managing and handling this. So if you're okay with timeline slipping, you're much more likely to see a healthy, happy execution of a timeline.
So if I take your meaning, and I agree with everything you said, you have to approach this with a lot more flexibility and just a different posture than you would a media buy even 10 years ago.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Like it's a different world, and you can't come at it trying to superimpose some grid of structure and demanding that and go off the handle if you don't get it.
Got to embrace a little chaos.
I'm very comfortable with chaos. So another way you can mitigate risks, don't mind if I say this about our firm, but you can work with an agency. So Whereas if you're a brand and you're working with a influencer for a one-off, that's a single relationship. If we work with an influencer quite often, that's going to be across 9 brands. And they're a lot less likely to burn that bridge.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that does give you some added protection.
Sure, yeah, because an influencer is like, I don't care about this $10,000. But if they know they're working with an agency who's feeding them hundreds of thousands of dollars a year because of different brand partnerships, they're not going to want to sour that relationship. So it gives you extra protection when you work with an agency, even above and beyond their guidance of letting you know sometimes it's which influencers are really good to work with, and more importantly, which ones sometimes aren't, or whether they're coaching you about the timelines or the process. There's a lot of value that can be added. We don't want to be too self-serving, so don't want to spend too much time on that. But do want to bring up one final thing, which is how you can, when you think about risks of influencer campaigns, we've talked about a lot of risk factors, but we have not talked about the single highest risk associated with influencer campaigns. And that is the opportunity cost of not running an influencer campaign while your competitors do. So a lot of times, yes.
Nicely
yes,
played.
I know.
Nicely played.
But it's true. We see this with a lot of brands in that they're drawn to working with an influencer because frankly their competitors have not yet done that, or they haven't really gone after it holistically. And influencers aren't going to want to hawk for 2 different brands within a competitive realm because it doesn't look good for their channel.
At least they shouldn't.
They should not.
And you should, as a brand, should be weary of that.
Agreed. But look, it's a fast-moving space. If you're not getting into influencers, your competitors likely are. So it's something to really, really think about. But again, that's something for you to consider. I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
I think we should wrap this one up.
We've talked about risk, baby. All right, I think that's all we've got today from Detroit. On behalf of Erich, I'm Brad. Thank you for watching.
Thanks.